Welcome to the UST Education recorded webinar series. This session is powered by US Transactions. UST is a boutique payment processing firm providing you with personalized service. We offer agnostic, best fit technology solutions for associations, nonprofits, and enterprise clients.
Thank you, Nicole. Good morning to you all. And I am monitoring the chat, so I'm excited to hear some of the things about it. And I think I'm going to try to do my best to give you some new ideas, give you some fresh perspectives, and talk about both individual certification programs or recognition programs, I call them. And I do want to talk about company recognition programs. I have worked for some trade associations, and I think it's important also to recognize those folks who are doing best practices and recognize them for their good work. So this is me. I'm an association person. I've worked through associations my entire career. Started at a construction industry trade association, understanding how they work with architects and engineers and helping promotion and influence and advocacy for building construction and building codes. Worked my way up as an executive director, ran a trade association for a little bit in the steel industry, and then became the executive director of hazardous materials management, professional society. And they are a single focused certification organization. So I learned a lot about how they work, how to implement them objectively, how to implement them through some ANSI accreditation. And then finally, about 10 years ago, I became a consultant because I enjoy this niche, and I've worked with so many very interesting clients to help them navigate this area. And I consider these as recognition programs. Really, the bottom line is you're recognizing your members for the good work that they do. So this is I'm using this as kind of a table of contents. I am going to be asking you these questions later on in the presentation. I really like the fact that UST has this requirement that for some engagement and some for participation. So I am going to monitor the chat, but I did want to put this up as just a table of contents. What I'm going to try to do today is give you some development activity, development experience, so you understand how these things are developed, and that might help you with your current programs and bring in new, fresh ideas, and also might help you if you're considering a program. And then at some point in time, I'll pause, and then we'll start to go over these questions in more detail. But I just wanted to put those up and certainly start thinking about those as we move along. So I want to give you a sense of what I call the recognition program ecosystem. In that is where these programs that an association, either a trade or a professional society, manages to award their members for either an occupation, either a profession, or I'm going to talk to you about recognizing for best practices. So these 5 elements are in this ecosystem. And I'm going to talk about each one. And I want to start off with a license. And I'm starting off with that one because that is the top of the food chain. That requires you to go through an assessment process, a certification, and then when you get awarded, you are legally able to perform that profession or occupation. I'm not going to talk about those details today, but the reason why I bring it up is that assessment requirement, that attestment of the professional's competency is developed in the exact same way as the other programs that you see on the screen. And I do want to show you that licenses are limited. I'm showing you on the right-hand side of the screen, just a screenshot of what is allowed in Virginia, the state of Virginia. And these regulated professions and occupations, you can't practice them without passing, and then that gives you the license to do that activity. Architects, engineers, hairstylists, other activities. But I just want to let you know they're developed in the exact same way I'm going to explain as we go down. Then there are to certify. Here you try to test authoritatively with the certification body, which could be a professional society, and you're meeting a job standard. And that job standard is usually developed through something called a job task analysis that we'll talk about as we go along in this presentation. There are certificate programs, and that is essentially an assessment to make sure that you fulfill a training requirement. You have some training, whether that's live or on the web, and there's an assessment at the end of that training to attest that you fulfill the training requirements, and then you become a certificate holder. So certification, certificate, there for individuals. Then there is a company recognition program. And what I found is that there are companies out there who are aligning with industry best practices. How can we recognize them and announce to not only their constituents, but to the industry that they're following those? And that is based on the evidence requirements that is also developed. And those three, including license, are developed in a process that I'm going to explain in a minute. They're developed through subject matter experts who want to meet and develop some sort of outline of a job standard, some sort of outline or of knowledge and learning outcomes and knowledge requirements, and some sort of best practice alignment. They're all developed in the exact same way. And then finally, I do want to talk about an attendance certificate. An attendance certificate is you have participated in a training event. And UST does this in an excellent, very concise way. After this presentation, you'll receive a certificate that says you fulfilled 1 hour of CAE training. That is exactly what you want to feed your CAE certification. But don't forget, if you offer education programs at your conferences, online, you should always follow up with some sort of certificate, even if you're not saying that there's CAE requirements. You should put on your certificate, and every organization should put on their certificate, how many hours they were in this learning activity. Because me, as a certificate, will use that in my certification in my recertification requirements. So you should really want to feed this system with the attendance certificates because it's so important for those certificates to use that as they recertify in particular for a certification program. So those are the 5 elements of the ecosystem. They're all developed in very similar ways. I will move on. So where do you find guidance for these ecosystem activities? Well, for certification, you find that guidance in an international standard conformity assessment requirements for bodies operating certification of persons. Now, don't get nervous about it. It is a standard that provides performance guidance to help you understand how you want to manage, operate, ensure stakeholder engagement, ensure competency, ensure objectivity. And those are available for purchase. If you're doing a certificate program, your guidance is found in an ASTM requirement, standard practice for certificate programs. And if you're a company, you are using those processes, subject matter experts, industry validation, evidence development to make sure that you are aligning with best practices. All these are available to the public. You can purchase these. If you are an organization offering a certification program or a certificate program, I recommend that you buy these. They're a couple $100s a piece. You don't have to be a member of any of these organizations to buy them. And you can align your work with this guidance. And eventually, if you do that in some comprehensive way, you can say to your constituents that the management system that we follow is outlined in this guidance. And that is perfectly okay, even though you haven't gone the next step, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is called accreditation. Here's what they look like. Again, available from ASTM, $100. I just purchased the 2026 version of the ISO 17024, $250. It's something that you should have if you offer these programs today, or even if you're considering these programs today. Now, let me just talk a second about accreditation. That is a different activity than certification or certificate. The organization, let's just say the National Concrete Masonry Association, offers a certification. Now they feel that they need a third-party assessment of their processes, of their management system, of their delivery, of their content. And they want it to be, say, internationally recognized. Well, if you do that, if you want that, you would then say to your leadership, we would like to accredit our certification program to this ANSI 17024. And make no mistake, it is a lot of work. When I managed this at the organization that I was the executive director at, we had a full-time staff as well as myself, as well as the other staff liaisons involved in this activity, because you're documenting everything. What you want to think about is a financial audit, but now you're auditing management systems, content development, meetings, activity. And you can see I've just tried to at least explain a little bit about what the volume is. The 17024 application is 44 pages. We had 41 attachments. The 2659 application is 26 pages with a whole bunch of attachments. And to get accredited, you would have a expert that is deputized by the American National Standards Institute to come into your space and audit you and your staff. And the reason why you do this is you want to be able to differentiate yourself from other programs that may be in your sector. Or if you want to engage in the international realm and be able to say that we are accredited to an international standard. And make no mistake, it is a promotion program to differentiate your work, and it also differentiates your organization. If the National Concrete Masonry Association is accredited, that is also provides some recognition to the organization that they are serious about the work that they do. And now they are accredited by a third party. It's a promotion program, but it is resource intensive and it's a commitment. Now, the reason why you might want to consider yourself on the international realm is that if you're certifying people and you're accredited in the United States, this organization, which is called the International Accreditation Forum, has a motto that says accredited once, United States, and then accepted everywhere. So the idea is that you are already have a entree into other accreditation organizations, which I'm just showing a snapshot for that on the right-hand side. So all these countries in blue have said that, yeah, if it's accredited in China, then it should be acceptable in the US. If it's accredited in the US, it should be accepted in Australia. And of course, it's not um, immediate, but it does get you, and I would say 80% of the way, because maybe these organizations that are not in the United States have a little bit of different aspects, a little bit different activities for their cultural issues or their language issues or other items that you would have to comply with. But you're probably 80 or 90% there when you go to other countries to get them to accept your program, your certification program, as accredited through the Australian accrediting organization. Okay. So kind of just a general sense, the ecosystem, why you're doing some of these things. But now I do want to drill down and talk to you about these common development principles, common development activities. The overall goal is stakeholder engagement, and that means subject matter experts, your industry, and your transparency. These are items that are available to anyone who's interested in your program, any federal government agency that wants to see how you develop your program, any state group, any consumers. All these are available, and they follow, stakeholder engagement and transparency. There's typically leadership engagement to make sure there's organizational commitment. You have what I call a qualitative process where you get subject matter experts and they define the requirements. And again, it's just based on their expertise. So it's a small group. It's kind of a focus group, if you will, to figure out what either the job description is, what the learning objectives are, or how the evidence is for best practices if you're looking at company ones. Then after that, you have a quantitative activity where you probably have some surveys to confirm with your industry or your profession, or you may have pilot programs to confirm with your industry or your profession. You have to do something that makes sense to validate what those subject matter experts did in that committee meeting room. You have to develop an assessment. That this assessment could be an exam for certification, could be exam for learning outcomes, could be a best practices manual and the evidence requirements. And then finally, you have to have the infrastructure to manage it all. The management system that talks about how that award is accomplished, how you interact with applicants and certificates, how you take ethic requirements, how you worry about complaints, how you develop and manage your assessment through consultants or psychometricians. All that is in your management system manual. I'm just showing that on the right-hand side, sort of a timeline where this was a program that I developed for the Arborist Society. Took about a year and a half to develop a certificate program. So these are long-term, but not in the 10-year time frame, in the 1 to 3 year time frame. And of course, projects like this is where your leadership engagement becomes in. They require time and effort by subject matter experts. Those are typically volunteers. So you do want staff who understand volunteer management, understand that your subject matter experts are doing this on a volunteer basis, and make sure, what I usually like to say is, leave no volunteer behind. If they volunteer to do this activity and they miss a meeting, it's up to the staff person to call that person and say, this is what we talked about, and we need you at the meeting, just to make sure that they're engaged and make sure how they do the work. So someone asked how often you recommend to do a job task analysis. Typically, that is managed through the same idea about how long your certification is good for. So certifications typically have no longer than a 5-year time frame. So you would do your JTA in a 5-year time frame. If your certification is only goes for 3 years because your profession has a lot of changes, say in the IT environment, or if there are consultants for artificial intelligence, and that's changing much quicker, you might have to do a JTA every 3 years. But typically 5 years is the max. I do want to drill down, talk about what those elements are in this activity. So now we're thinking as the director of certification for an association, the vice president, even the executive director. There are typically 4 main program elements. If you're accredited, you have an accreditation management activity. There is where all your staff time, all your fees associated with the accreditation program. And again, it's not cheap. So if you're doing an ANSI accreditation, you do have to pay the auditors. That could run $1,000 or $2,000 every time they come in your office. Thankfully, they only come 3 times out of the 5-year period. They have an on-site audit in year 1. They have a desk audit where they make you develop a binder in year 2, and so forth and so on. You have scheme management activities. That's where your psychometrician costs are. That's where your other staff activities are. That's where your item writing is going on, and other consultants, and your staff time. You have the assessment services, and that's providing where you conducting your exams. Are they remote? Are they at testing centers? Are they at conferences? And then, of course, this is so important, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, is this communication between the applicant and the certificant. Certificates need to be reminded. Applicants need to be reminded. I've worked for my organization where applications are hanging around for years, and we are not providing touch points for those people. I've talked about where we only see certificates every 5 years when they recertify. You should be talking to them maybe on a yearly basis. Hey, don't forget, you were supposed to do 10 hours of professional development last year. Did you do that? Hey, here may be some guidance on where you might find your professional development. Make sure you communicate with those applicants and certificates. And I'm going to do a little bit of a dialogue as I go through that, as I move on to the presentation. And then finally, let's talk about timelines, what kind of steps you might need to do. You're starting from scratch, so you have a blank sheet of paper, and this really is focused on a certification program. So you have to do probably some strategic planning with your leadership. what profession do they want to recognize? Or what profession do they think needs to be recognized? Those are important questions as you talk about when you start to think about strategic planning to develop a certification program. In a certificate program, you would ask the questions, but change it to learning outcomes. What do you want this person to know? What do you want this certified person maybe that needs some expertise to understand and know? What are the learning outcomes and knowledge areas? And then if you're doing company, you would say, where are the best practices? What evidence do you think we needed? Do we need to recognize these companies? Would that help them in their business to get recognized so then they can go to their consumers and say, hey, we are recognized by our trade association for complying with best practices. You should use us. So those are the kind of dialogues that they have to do that. You would do a job duties analysis. So once you decide that you want to do this, and again, you can say job duties, you can say knowledge areas, you can say evidence in that second bullet. Get your SMEs to figure that out for you. Convene them. And that might take a year. I'll show you an example, 28 teleconferences to develop a curriculum outline so they can do a certificate program. So there is a lot of work associated with that. And tell them up front that this is a commitment, that you're leaving a legacy to your profession and your industry, and we need your help. Then you need to develop some sort of assessment. Again, in a certification, it's an exam. In a certificate program, it's an exam that tests your knowledge gain. And in a company, it's an evidence-based application. A certification could also be some sort of portfolio review. That gets a little more complicated, but that is also something that's assessing their competency. You want to make sure you pilot it, make sure it makes sense. You can do that at a conference. You can get some other folks who are not on your subject matter experts, but those luminaries that want to help, and you can get them to pilot the program in a setting that mimics what the certificate might do as it's launched. And then in a parallel, you want to manage your management system. It documents your policies and procedures of the certification program and how you do the award. It is the document for staff to make sure that they are awarding that in a comprehensive, objective manner, and it follows all the rules. And you can see I'm showing a timeline here on the right-hand side, approximately from a blank sheet of paper for a certification to probably launch. It's probably 2 years, 2.5 years, maybe 3 years. So just watch that, manage that time. There are things you can do in parallel, like management system. So you want to make sure that you think about that and think about that timeline. Finally, I just want to take a time out here and talk a little bit about this communication dialogue. There are applicants who you want to turn in certificates, and then you want them to recertify. And that is in the case of a certification. In a certificate program, most likely you want them to retake the training because after 3 to 5 years, it's changed and you want them to come back. And then for a company, you certainly want to have some sort of time limit where maybe best practices are changing and you have them come back and do the process as to recertify. And make no mistake, recertification is your customer service measure. If they're certifying and they're not coming back after 3 to 5 years, you've lost the client. So you need to think about how you interact with those professionals and those companies during this whole process. I'm an applicant. I have to account for my eligibility, my education, I pay a fee, and then you let me take whatever assessment I need to take. I come to your website or I come to your application, I report my eligibility, and I pay your application fee. You as the recognition body, you approve that application. Now I want to put in what I call a radical thought here. The recognition body does not need to review all applications. And I'll tell you why I believe that's the case. I am the applicant. I am putting resources into filling out your application, and then I am also paying a fee to be awarded an ability to get this assessment. You should believe me because I've done that work. And the reason why you believe me is because you're not going to give me an award until you then review my application. So here's what I would suggest. After you allow that applicant to take the exam and he's filled out all the fields and you don't need to review it at all, you don't need to reach out to any of his employers or her employers, you don't need to reach out and get a transcript. The applicant takes the assessment. Before you award, that's when you review the application. And if you think about that for a second, if some of these programs have a 75% pass rate, now you're only reviewing 75% of the applications. And at the same time, now you're reviewing 25% of the fail reports and you implement your retake fee. So instead of reviewing 100% of the applications and then reviewing 25% of the retake activities, which is 125%, if you will, you're now only reviewing 75% of your applications and 25% of your fail reports and retake implementations. You reduced your workload. And you are doing that because you are asking the applicant to fill out the form, pay a fee, make an attestment that it's true to the best of their ability. You should believe them, and that reduces your workload. And again, before you award, you would always say in some place in your materials that the recognition body awards after review of applications in full. But that reduces your workload in reviewing applications. And then finally, this recertification activity. I have worked with a lot of clients that focus on applicants and exam processes, but somehow leaves the recertification to a 5-year process and doesn't engage with your certificates all that well. You should send them periodic reminders. You should send them saying, hey, you should have taken 10 hours last year. And let me tell you, our conference has education activities. That's a perfect way to promotion. Again, you are never awarding unless you take a look at that recertification outline or that accounting. But you can say words like, you should check out our conference. That's where some of the education is. Or you should check out our webinars. That's where some sort of education is. I mean, many associations do this very well, where they will be very frank and say, where else would you get your education from except from your professional society? Come to our conference so you can continue to be a certificate. You should do that. And then the recognition body awards that recertification. Believe the applicants, reduce your workload, remind certificates so they are returning, and that increases your customer service rate, and that increases your recertification rate. Okay, let me pause for a minute. So that's essentially the outline and my section on development, exposure, recognition, what all those programs are, and how we're developing it. So I want to take a pause here for a minute. And the questions I want to ask you for the UST questions is, if you have a certification or certificate program, how does it relate to your mission? What is the impact that you have today? And if you're thinking about one, same questions. So I'll pause for a minute and we'll let you populate the chat. And then you can see the other questions are grayed out. I see that Matt says it is our mission. So you must be an organization that is a single focused. Currently do so someone else is considering. So I hope this helps. I do want to say that I'm available for any questions, comments today, tomorrow. I'm available to talk about these programs. Someone's saying that they're an accreditation body. Elevate the profession. That's a phrase. And thank you for that, because that's so important. What you're doing with these recognition programs is elevating the profession. And once you elevate that profession is more valuable to their consumers. Licensure for architects, yep. So that's aligned with the state licensing group. So they must manage their activity to make sure that is a program that is transparent, objective, those activities. A lot of considering. We do education, but not certificates. Certainly, you could consider taking maybe a group of those education programs and putting it into a certificate program. And I'm going to show you that example um, in a second. Helps brand the expertise and allows us to be more successful through influence. Thank you. That's exactly what these programs do. And that's why you want to recognize the good work that they do. Okay, I want to give you some examples. So I'm going to go on, and first I want to talk about a certificate program. This was an interesting one. We decided that if they wanted to align with the ASTM 2659, not get accredited, but to get alignment. So meaning that everything we did, and they brought me in as a consultant because I understand ASTM 2659 to ensure all their processes were aligned with that standard, as well as to develop a management system manual. Blank sheet of paper. You can see the time frame, May 21 to a pilot of 2024. We had 10 teleconferences to actually do the curriculum analysis. We paused, and then we needed to develop the assessment because we're following a certificate program. And then we had a meeting every 2 weeks in 2023 for the assessment. And essentially, we had 4 learning domains, and we had 4 committees, and they met for 2 hours, a half hour apiece, and we just kept up the drumbeat. Staff was always available. Some of them were available, some of them were not available, but we developed that. And we had SMEs define the role. So pretty standard development. But what was interesting on this one is there were challenging board of director conversations. Not me, but the executive director of this smaller group was talking to their board of directors, and their board of directors were construction professionals. Their board of directors were owners of construction companies that are involved in refrigerated warehouse construction. So what we were trying to do is we were trying to educate those engineers that come out of school and they understand how to build a warehouse, but they don't understand what the roles are for a refrigerated space, putting a refrigeration system in a large Home Depot sized warehouse, which is all where all your food comes from, by the way. So they talked about, and there were conversations that delayed a little bit. Why do I want to train my competition? Why do I want to get people in and then trade from other companies? When they get the certificate, there's going to be a rating party, and some of these companies that are bigger are going to hire all the attractive employees who have this certificate program that they didn't have to pay for. And the one that really I scratch my head is we don't want to train our clients. And we worked our way through the first 2 by telling that we're elevating the profession. These people need to be recognized. Your sector has some movement anyway. We don't believe we're going to exacerbate or promote that activity. We want to develop this program, and so we were we did okay. Again, it wasn't me; I was supporting the executive director here, but the training my clients, that one I had to scratch my head in. And I am a believer that you want to make sure that everyone involved in your profession, whether it's the person doing the work or the one who's consuming the work, should speak the same language. So when we piloted the program, we only required constructors to be in attendance, but after a while they saw, and we kind of proof was in the pudding, we opened it up. So now they are training not only engineers and designers who work for construction companies, but they're also training the warehouse managers. So then there's a quick dialogue, and the constructors saw a benefit in getting the warehouse managers in the room. So then they can individually during breaks or whatever, just have some dialogue about future work. Typical program, difficult conversations. This was a company activity. And I really love this one because it has a very simple equation. The federal government put out a regulation on safe food transport, a law. The industry responded, oh, there's a law out there that says we have to have best practices. The industry responded to writing a best practices. And then they called me in and say, well, now that we have this best practices, how do we know we're using it? Or how do we recognize its use? Well, we developed the certified coal carrier. And these are companies that transport refrigerated food or frozen food. These are the tractor trailers you see on the highway that in front of the trailer, they have a refrigeration unit. These are the companies have to comply with best practices. So we sat down with a group of subject matter experts, developed a proof of knowledge, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Excuse me. We developed an evidence-based application, which I'm showing there on the right-hand side. We did that through teleconferences. We had 28 teleconferences to develop the evidence-based application. And just for a second, if you look at the evidence-based application, it essentially is a table of contents for a binder that they develop with contains the evidence. And you can see that the last column is just an attachment number. Where are you pointing to me or the reviewer where the evidence is? And what we did is we said, well, since we're bringing forward this industry best practices and we want its industry-wide adoption, we probably need to give them some examples. So we developed example proof of conformance through subject matter experts to ensure that we are communicating what the requirement and how you show evidence of that requirement. But we then said to ourselves, well, hold on a minute. We may get an unexperienced person putting together this binder. So we decided to develop, we decided to develop what we call the proof of knowledge, essentially an exam based on the industry best practices. So what happens is that if a company says they want to be in this program, they fill out the evidence. And then the last page is, please identify your warehouse people, please identify your supervising drivers who we need to understand the best practices. So then that supervisor can tell the driver what to do. And we developed an exam. So companies are now using this proof of knowledge as a way to do an internal training program. We have one company who uses this program to manage all their hundreds of supervisors in all parts of the country to make sure that they understand best practices. So these programs should have two elements because we're not doing an on-site audit here. We're doing an evidence application, and then we're saying our way to understand if you truly have the best practices in your company, we're asking your supervisors to be knowledgeable about that. So that had a very unique perspective. And then finally, I want to give you a program that I worked on that contains all the elements. If you're in New Orleans or from New Orleans, when it rains, flooding happens. So there is an engineering technology green infrastructure that is essentially vegetation, or it could be drainage, or it could be some other cisterns that are available, and they're distributed. So these help to slow down the runoff and hopefully lessen the cause of flooding. But these are distributed systems. So then the state of New Orleans, the state of Louisiana said, well, hey, we need some help. And we also have a goal to train unskilled labor. And so if these systems are going to be managed by landscape architects, which is what they were, or landscape contractors, there's an opportunity here to train unskilled workers. So let's develop some sort of certification program. Well, now that they have this program, we also said, well, we want to recognize the companies. We now need a best practices guide. So we developed a certification for New Orleans and Louisiana, and there was some federal funding, as well as there was some nonprofit NGO funding, because there was some NGO funding in New Orleans who were interested in training unskilled workers to become a better workforce, to become better citizens. So we did all that work. We partnered with another program, the Clean Water Certificate. We developed a best practices guide. We developed a certification program. And what is unique about this certification program, it has training as an eligibility requirement. And it's ANSI accredited. So you think about eligibility requirement as years of experience and education. Well, this one had no years of experience, a high school diploma, But then you have to take this training class so you understand the technology. And so once you take that training class, you then take the certification exam, and then you become a green infrastructure professional. And at the same time, we also developed a best practices guide. And at the same time, we also developed some non-technical skills, which is what that other program was about, just understanding how to do math, understanding how to use a calculator, uh, understanding how you might develop a budget. That was needed for these unskilled workers to be participants and be successful in this NGICP program. So we had a lot of moving parts and all developed. I'll show you in a second. This was the application for the construction company. We hired a consultant to do the green infrastructure best practices. That took about a year and a half. He was an academic in this system, an urban planner who understood the system very well, developed a best practices guide, and then from that we developed our evidence-based application for the companies. And then finally, we had to do some business planning. I mean, this was a big program, a lot of moving parts. So we did do some business planning. We did identify the goals and objectives, increase visibility, distinguish these people from other professionals who do a green infrastructure, recognize the profession, developing a profession. We had a business plan that we developed, a document with that table of contents. We did some expense analysis to figure out how much it's going to cost. We did some surveying of other programs that are similar to make sure that we were charging the right amount of money. And we wrapped this all up in a business plan. And that was part of our deliverable for this program. But it was exciting to me because it contained all the elements that were involved in recognition programs, company, certificate, certification. Okay, let me pause here for a minute, pose another question. For those companies that or organizations who have programs, how do you develop your market? How big is your market? And what kind of marketing activity are you doing? And I do want to talk a little bit about that as we move forward. So please, let me pause for a minute. Nicole, I think I'm doing pretty good on time. I got about 10 minutes. So I just want to pause for a second and see about, tell me how big your market is, or if you're considering one, where you might find that data. And then, of course, how you might, in a nutshell, who do you talk to? How are you marketing that thing? It's difficult to market a certification program. I'm sure there's a lot of good best practices out there. Specific to professionals early in their career. That makes good sense. Get them in early so they have something behind their name and they can continue and be active in the profession. I'm hoping that there is some tips and tricks to help you think about how you might develop a certification program and what you might do. Okay, so let me move forward. Again, this was a program. This is easy marketing. This company was working in roadway markings, and they saw an opportunity, and that's what's in the gray. That is from a Federal Aviation action report. Personnel involved in the application of airfield markings should complete training. Again, who knew that those markings on the runways are important, but they actually are. They manage the approach. They manage the number of feet available. They manage the alignment. I've heard pilots say when they make that final turn to an airport and they see that the alignment and the runway is in good shape, they relax. So they already had a best practices here. So we spent some time developing a curriculum outline, and then we spent some time developing a course. And this was easy marketing. So this company has now been able to train airport operations departments all over the United States. And those are the logos of all the airports that they've had the program to. So it's aligned with ASTM 2659. Excuse me, I made a mistake there. And that's all they needed to say to the Federal Highway. The Federal Highway wanted some sort of alignment to best practices or guidance. And once we said that we did that and we showed them the documents, they were very comfortable in promoting this program to their clients. So this worked out very well. And And this company was very innovative. They called this AMP, Airfield Marking Professional, which I thought was very, very clever. So you need to identify your customers. There's a funnel, if you will. You have hand raisers. You certainly want to make sure who is looking at your application, how you might capture that information. They might have different needs in different sectors, so you might have to communicate to them that differently and figure out how you adjust your actions. And this was a sort of a marketing map that I had a consultant that I had hired do for us. We were in the hazardous materials management, so there was solid liquid waste, transportation of hazardous materials, petrochemical and their hazardous materials, and trying to figure out who we're going to market to. And the other marketing thing is, again, like I mentioned before, please engage your certificates on a periodic basis. Just the way we did this, I did some work in China for the China petroleum industry, and they were interested in hazardous materials management, or what they call dangerous goods, and they thought that our program would be able to recognize professionals in the petroleum industry in China. And what they told me is that they said a certification is like their family name. So that resonated with me, and we came back and we developed this, put the exclamation point behind your name. Take one of these programs, become recognized. So I thought that was very clever and very interesting to develop that marketing program. And I do want to talk for a second. This was so important to me. How you might figure out who do you partner with? Are you talking to other associations about your program and how it might benefit them? And believe me, it does. And I focused on this because my organization, the International Hazardous Materials, the Institute of Hazardous Materials, was a single focused organization. We did not provide any education programs. So I finally figured out that, wait a minute, we put demand in the marketplace for professional development. Here I'm just showing a graph. So if you have 100 certificates, I'm looking up here, and that professional development costs approximately $50 an hour. That's $50,000 that you're putting in the marketplace. Now, maybe that organization you're talking to doesn't get all of it, but they're going to get some of it. If you have more certificates, there's more demand in the marketplace. And I would go to allied organizations and tell them that, well, wait a minute, we need to partner here because my certificates are going to your conferences, and we're not expecting a monetary return, but hey, how about a free trade show booth? How about a free article in your newspaper? How about a free magazine ad? Because we're putting out that marketplace potential. And I'm glad someone says we communicate regularly with organizations in our program space. Members often attend each other's program. You should figure out how to recognize that. Figure out that your income is not just based on fees, application, exam fees, recertification fees. They're based on the demand that you're putting in the marketplace. You need to recognize that in some way. Now, if it's internal, you have to recognize it. If you're an internal certification group of a larger association, you need to make sure that education department knows where they're getting their demand from. So I just want to make sure that was so important to me, and that helped me out. And then finally, I just want to talk about financial expectations. Support the higher education phase. Get faculty talking about licensing early. And that must be from the architect. Yeah, the NCARB, I believe that is, and that makes sense. Get into the classroom. Let those students know that there's a profession out there, and that profession, and you can put an exclamation point behind your name. I do have a little calculator, and I just want to spend a minute on this because, again, I find this very profound. Just have a little calculator. So this one has the application fee is $300. You require 10 professional developments a year, and you get 100 applications. In that scenario, you're getting constant funding every year. You're basically not growing your funding potential because you're not asking your certificates to contribute in some way to make sure that the infrastructure is available. if you decide to put on a simple maintenance fee, every year they have to pay $100. You can take that same scenario and you could have a retention rate of 75%, and you could easily show that you're going to pay back that program in 5 years. The reason is you're getting continual money. And the nice thing about a maintenance fee is you could amortize your research fee over a 5-year or 3-year period, charge them that maintenance fee every year, and then charge them zero when they recertify. So you eliminate that impediment. Because believe me, they're spending a lot of money to recertify anyway in their professional development activity, in accounting for all their professional development work. So be kind to them and get the recurring fees to keep the house open. That's kind of how I pitched it, and you can pay back very quickly. And then you see what happens when you add this professional development recognition to it. So in my little calculator, I just said that you put out 10 hours a year, and you only get half of that. And now you're paying that program in about 2 years. So you can see how these are important when you decide to budget for these and present this material to your board of directors. And it's not just the application fee with any kind of expenses. It is the activity of some other that, and I appreciate that, Susan. So thank you. If one thing I'm asking you to do is think about a maintenance fee, get them to recur. And the reason why they're doing it is because they actually want a place to come back to home. And if you don't have a place to come home to, then that certification is not working. Okay. I had 2 more programs, but I am going to just rush ahead for a second. The one thing I wanted to show you is that I worked for the Geo Institute, a group of engineers, and what was interesting here is this was a labeling program or a company program for systems, but since there were state requirements, and I thought this was very exciting, they decided that the way to make sure this program worked for companies supplying these systems in the United States is get them an understanding of what they're doing in each state. So we used to say, if you do this IDEA program, that's what it was called, it was expensive, you'll get 80% there. And then, oh, by the way, we have the state requirements that you can download. And some of those state requirements, like Alaska or Alabama, they just said do IDEA. And you can imagine California, they had five pages of state requirements. So I just wanted to expose that to you and this audience to say, if you have programs that are running different in different states, you could figure out how to get those state requirements and offer those to your certificates, to your companies, and so they can figure out how to operate in individual states. And then finally, I do want to thank you. So both companies and professionals can be recognized. They are aligned and develop in similar ways with subject matter experts. How does it relate to your mission? Financial expectations. You should account for maintenance fee and professional development. And please focus on customer satisfaction. That is your recertification. If you're not focusing on that and you're not figuring out how many you need to recertify every year and talking to them, you might be losing a lot of customers. With that, I'm available. Please email me if you'd like to hear more information. I'm always available to answer questions. I do participate at ASAE Collaborate a bit, so maybe you've seen some of my posts there. And so with that, I will turn this back over to Nicole